school. Don't let the name fool you. My story starts about 5 years ago when I was first starting middle school. So I was basically all of your guys' age. I grew up with my family in Ohio, and I really looked up to both my parents. My mom was a doctor, and my dad was a businessman. One thing that you should know about my dad is he was one of the most active people you've probably ever met. Like, he did like 10Ks, marathons, triathlons, and biking like all across the state. And basically anything that was like cardio, he was doing it. One day when I was in 6th grade, I remember I went out to youth group and my dad went out for a run. And I remember it was just like a normal day, and I got back and my dad had not gotten back to the house yet. So my mom was really scared and she called the police, and it turned out that while my dad was on the run, his heart failed and he died. 2 years later, my mom started having really bad headaches. She had headaches for like her entire life, and like even when she was a kid. But these were starting to get worse, and so she saw a doctor, and I remember sitting on my bed one day and getting a call from her, and in tears her telling me that the doctor had found 2 tumors in her head, and one of them was cancer. So for the rest of that year, me and my family would watch my mom from being one of the smartest people I had met and one of my role models in my life, to her not being able to take care of herself and her not being able to speak until eventually she passed away as well. So you can imagine being me in that moment where I had just lost both my parents, and I was searching for answers to why these things were happening to me. So I started asking the big questions. I asked, is there a God? Why are we here? What is our purpose in this world? Why does evil happen? Why does anything exist in the first place? And as I started to ask these big questions, I was convinced that I would find a whole bunch of answers from a whole bunch of really smart people, and I would be able to eventually, I was thinking I was not going to stay a Christian because of all these things that were happening to me. I would go to church just out of habit, as the rest of my family was, and look around and say, this is all just made up. I thought it was silly at some point. And as I looked around at the various options that people have proposed, I looked at atheism, I looked at nihilism, I looked at agnosticism, I looked at other religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam. And what I found after all of my searching was not what I expected to find. What I found was not that there was a whole bunch of answers and we can just pick any one of them. What I found was that the questions I was asking, only Christianity could answer. After all of my searching, I was left with nothing except Jesus to fall back on. In Matthew 7, Jesus says, "The one who hears these words of mine and builds his life upon them is like the person who builds a house on the rock. And the rains come and the floods come, but the house stands because it's founded upon the rock." And he says, whoever hears these words of mine and doesn't do them is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. And when the floods come and the rain beat on the house will fall. See, that's all of us today. Because life is going to hit you, and it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. I can promise you that. And when you have these big questions, you need something to try and answer them. What I'm telling you is that if you don't have Jesus to answer those questions, they're probably not going to get answered. And so my question for all of you today is, what questions are you wrestling with? you have some big question that you really want to get answered, we have leaders all across here and in your small group that are just waiting for you to ask one of those, and so we can help you out. And the other thing, my other question for you is, what are you falling back on that's not Jesus? Because whatever it is, I can promise you, if you build your life on it, it will sink like sand. Thank you.